A 10-year-old girl sells sweets on the street and hides a difficult life. A millionaire discovers her and tries to help, but she rejects him. Following the clues, he discovers the secret of her family and is surprised. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Maria, a little girl of just 10 years old, had the ability to make anyone smile when they looked at her, even though her dirty and worn clothes were nothing to be proud of. With a basket full of homemade sweets, she walked every day along the main street of the city, a bustling place filled with people rushing to reach their destinations. Some looked at her with indifference, others with disdain, but she didn't let it affect her. Her sweet voice and smile were always ready to sell more sweets, even though the sneers and murmurs of the crowd followed her at every step. "Sweets, candies, and chocolates to sweeten your day," she shouted enthusiastically, hoping that someone, at least one person, would stop. Some bought out of pity, others because they truly enjoyed the sweets she made with such care. Despite her circumstances, Maria never complained. She knew her job was difficult, but she also knew that in every smile she elicited, in every coin they gave her in exchange for her sweets, there was a small victory. However, that day, something different happened. A well-dressed man, wearing an expensive suit and a look that exuded power, stopped in front of her. "Do you make these sweets?" he asked, observing the basket with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Maria, surprised by the question, looked at him with distrust. It wasn't common for someone so elegant to pay attention to a girl like her. His eyes, although kind, seemed to size her up from head to toe, as if he was evaluating something beyond her appearance. "Yes, sir. They're the best. Would you like to try?" she answered, her voice nervous but determined. The man smiled, but something in his face changed instantly. It wasn't a common, friendly smile. It was a smile that seemed to understand much more than she could imagine. "My name is Ricardo," he said, extending his hand toward her. "I'd like to offer you a job. My company could give you an opportunity that would change your life. What do you say?" Maria took a step back, her eyes widening, and her heart began to beat faster. A job for her. How could someone like him offer her something like that? A girl who lived in misery, who wore dirty and worn clothes, who sold sweets to survive. However, what surprised her most wasn't the offer itself, but what she felt inside, an inexplicable fear. "No, I can't accept," she murmured, avoiding his gaze, quickly turning around and starting to walk in the opposite direction. Ricardo watched her leave, a mix of bewilderment and curiosity in his eyes. Why reject an offer like that? What was behind her refusal? Something didn't add up. Maria wasn't just any girl. There was something about her that drew him in, something he couldn't stop thinking about. Intrigued, he decided to follow her, though he didn't know why. He couldn't get the thought out of his head. What was that girl hiding? Why was she refusing to accept an opportunity that would surely change her life? With every step Maria took, Ricardo couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something dark and deep behind that innocent smile. What if everything he saw was just a facade? As the girl continued on her way, oblivious to the thoughts circling in the mind of a man who had everything life could offer, something in her destiny was about to change. But was she ready for what was to come? Ricardo couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, with her basket of sweets and her innocent gaze. But there was something in her rejection that deeply confused him. Something didn't add up, and it tormented him. He had seen her reject his offer as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if her life had been filled with rejections, decisions made without even thinking about them. But who was she really? Why would a girl like Maria, who seemed so full of life and kindness, reject an opportunity that would undoubtedly change her fate? That afternoon, after leaving the office, Ricardo decided to search for her again. He was in the city center, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of people coming and going, when he finally saw her. There she was again, selling her sweets, with that same smile that never faded for a second. Her basket was full, and even though the looks of disdain were still obvious, Maria didn't seem to notice them. She kept doing her work, as if it were the only thing that truly mattered. Ricardo approached her with firm steps, not sure exactly what to say. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. He felt a strange urge to help her. When he reached her, the girl looked at him in surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to return. "Hello, little one," Ricardo said, softening his voice, trying not to sound intimidating. "My name is Ricardo. Do you remember me? The last time we met, I offered you a job." Maria didn't say anything, but the tension on her face was evident. Her gaze shifted to the ground, as if she were trying to avoid what was coming. Ricardo noticed and decided not to push her too hard. "Listen," he continued, his tone more serious. "I know life isn't easy, and I'm sure you've had to face a lot of difficulties, but I also know that you have something special, a talent that shouldn't go to waste. My company could offer you a chance to grow, to change your life." Maria, although visibly nervous, didn't stop looking at him, but now it was different. In her eyes, there was not just distrust, but a deep unease, as if she were about to reveal something, but didn't dare. "No, I don't want to," she said, this time with more firmness, but her voice trembled. "I can't." Ricardo couldn't help but notice the sadness behind her words. Something in her told him that the reason for her rejection had nothing to do with the offer itself, but with something much bigger, much more painful. "Why?" he asked, unable to silence the curiosity that overwhelmed him. "I don't understand. Why reject something that could help you?" Maria looked at him for a moment, then looked away, as if she were struggling with her thoughts, her fear. Finally, with a barely audible voice, she said, "It's because of my mom." Ricardo frowned. "Your mom?" he repeated, unsure what else to say. Maria nodded slowly, her expression changing to something darker. "My mom taught me that you can't trust anyone, that people only try to take advantage of others, and I can't take that risk." Ricardo fell silent, processing what he had just heard. Each word Maria had said gave him another piece of the puzzle, but there were still too many missing pieces. Her story was much deeper than he had imagined. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of you," Ricardo said sincerely. "I just want to help you. I want you to have a chance to be something more than this. I can help you and your mother. You don't have to do it alone." But Maria no longer looked at him. Her mind seemed to be elsewhere, as if she had closed all the doors to her heart. She didn't trust. She couldn't. There were too many invisible scars, wounds that Ricardo still didn't understand. Before he could say anything else, she took a step back. "I'm sorry, but I can't," she repeated, and without waiting for his response, she began to walk away. Ricardo watched her for a moment. Each step she took seemed more distant, more unreachable. The mystery of the girl consumed him completely, but there was also something deeper, something he had never felt before, a desire to help her. As he watched her disappear into the crowd, he couldn't get Maria's words out of his head. "You can't trust anyone." What had happened in her life for that 10-year-old girl to come to such a conclusion? Ricardo knew he had to find out. And this time, he wouldn't let her slip away so easily. Ricardo couldn't stop thinking about what Maria had said. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice, the words of distrust, the fear reflected in her gaze. What had happened for such a small child, so full of life, to have so little hope in people? The mystery of her rejection tormented him. He decided that he needed to know more, that he needed to understand where all that pain came from. That afternoon, after work, Ricardo began to follow Maria. The city was wrapped in a mixture of noise and lights, but he barely noticed them. He was focused on one goal: to find out what more was hidden behind that girl. Maria walked through several streets, always looking down, not interacting with anyone. People ignored her or looked at her with disdain, but she seemed not to notice. Her steps were firm, as if she had a mission, but at the same time, there was something in her attitude that showed she was used to being invisible. Ricardo followed her for several blocks, observing her walk, never losing sight of her. The city seemed to change its face as they moved away from the main hustle. The elegant stores and offices of big businessmen gave way to darker streets, with more dilapidated buildings. Maria didn't stop, and he didn't lose her. Finally, they arrived at an area where abandoned buildings dominated the landscape. From the shadows, Ricardo saw Maria stop in front of a crumbling building. It wasn't a place anyone would choose to go, and certainly not a little girl. Why was she there? What was behind that forgotten structure? Ricardo moved closer discreetly, hiding in the shadows of nearby streets. From there, he watched her enter the building, not looking back, as if she knew every corner of that place. The building looked like an old factory, with dirty walls and broken windows. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would want to live. Yet, Maria disappeared inside. Ricardo waited a few minutes, giving himself time to process what he had seen. Why was she living there? He felt a growing curiosity that pushed him to act. He decided to get closer, and without making a sound, peered through one of the broken windows of the building. From there, he saw a figure he hadn't anticipated, a woman older than Maria, but equally dirty and dressed in a disheveled way. She seemed to be organizing some items in what appeared to be a small makeshift room. Was it her mother? Ricardo moved back a little, unsure of what he had just seen, but his mind was full of questions. If that woman really was her mother, what were they doing there? Why were they living in that place, so far from everything and filled with rubble? Something wasn't right, and the desire to know more led him to make a decision. The next morning, Ricardo returned to the building, this time with an excuse to enter. He needed to talk to Maria and her mother. As he walked toward the entrance, he felt uneasy, as though he were invading a sacred space. However, his concern for them outweighed his discomfort. He entered cautiously, trying not to make a sound. The building was dark and dusty, and the air was thick. Eventually he found Maria and her mother in one of the back rooms. There, amid what looked like chaos of old furniture and dirty clothes, the two were together, organizing some food. The scene was desolate, but at the same time, there was something heartwarming about it. They were united in their daily struggle to survive. Ricardo slowly approached, not wanting to scare them. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I know this might be uncomfortable, but I need to talk to you." They both looked at him, but Maria's reaction was immediate. She became defensive, as if his presence in that place was a threat. Her mother, however, didn't seem as surprised. Her eyes, though tired, were alert. "What do you want here?" Raquel, Maria's mother, asked in a low but firm voice. Ricardo took a step back. He didn't want to seem intrusive, but he knew he had to offer them something more. I'm here because I want to help. I know it's not easy, but I want to offer you an opportunity. Maria has a lot of potential, and I believe she could have a different life away from this place." Raquel stared at him, evaluating his words. Maria, however, looked at the ground, not daring to look up. "What do you want from us?" Raquel asked, not fully trusting. Ricardo realized that distrust ran deep in them. But he also saw something else, a desire to get out of that darkness, though buried under layers of pain and fear. "I just want to give you an opportunity," Ricardo repeated. "A different life, But if you don't want it, I understand. I just want you to know you can trust me." Raquel looked at her daughter, who still avoided looking at him, and then finally she spoke. "I don't trust anyone, and neither does my daughter." Ricardo felt the conversation was reaching a deadlock, but he couldn't give up so easily. There was something in the way Raquel had spoken, something that told him that even if they didn't accept now, there was a crack of hope. What more could he do to earn their trust? Days passed, and Ricardo couldn't shake off the words Raquel had said. Something in her had deeply marked him, especially when she said she didn't trust anyone. The way she had said it, so decisively, left him unsettled. She wasn't just protecting her daughter, she seemed to be defending something much bigger. There was a story behind those words, a story he didn't fully understand, but that he now felt he had to uncover. He decided he needed to investigate more about Raquel, about her past, to understand why this woman, who had shown so much strength, didn't trust anyone. The answer couldn't be as simple as generalized fear. Something else must have been involved. Ricardo contacted his lawyer and asked him to investigate Raquel thoroughly. Deep down, he felt there was something very deep that wasn't being told, something that could help Maria and her mother get out of that darkness. His investigation didn't take long to yield results. Raquel had been a successful businesswoman years ago. She had started her own business, a high-end clothing store, and it had grown quickly, becoming a staple in the city. Reviews of her products were glowing, and her store was one of the most exclusive. However, her life took an unexpected turn when she met her ex-husband, Daniel. Daniel had been a charming man, seemingly perfect. Raquel fell in love with him quickly, and soon after they got married. They had Maria, and Raquel believed her life would be perfect. However, appearances can be deceiving. After a couple of years of marriage, Daniel began to show a different side. He started manipulating Raquel, controlling her, taking away her control over her own business. He told her she wasn't capable of managing the company, that she needed to delegate more, that she should take a break. And what Raquel didn't know was that Daniel was slowly stealing from her business. His ability to manipulate her and put her in a vulnerable position was so subtle that Raquel didn't realize it until it was too late. One afternoon, Raquel arrived at the store and found everything closed. When she entered, she discovered that the place had been emptied, and worst of all, her bank account was empty. Daniel had disappeared, taking everything she had, her money, her business, and most painfully, her trust. With her life destroyed and pregnant with Maria, Raquel had no choice but to flee. She knew that if she stayed in the city, she would be destroyed, and Daniel had enough contacts to ensure she would never be someone important again. So, with only what she was wearing and a few savings, she decided to escape. For years, she lived on the streets in temporary shelters until she found the abandoned building where she now resided. Despite being in a desperate situation, she never allowed her daughter to know the full truth. The only lesson Raquel taught Maria was to distrust people. Never trust anyone, sweetheart. People only want to take advantage of you. When Ricardo learned about this part of Raquel's past, he understood much more about her attitude. She had been a strong woman with big dreams, but those dreams were destroyed by a man who only used her. Now, the fear of being betrayed again kept her in that bubble of distrust. On the other hand, Maria, who had always been treated with that same disdain and distrust, believed the world was full of people who only wanted to take advantage. She herself had closed herself off from the world, fearful that someone might do to her what had been done to her mother. Ricardo understood that, to help Maria and her mother, it wasn't enough to offer them a job or a roof. He had to help them rebuild what Daniel had taken from them, their trust in themselves and others. To do this, he first needed to get close to Raquel and show her that he wasn't like the others, that he, at least, wouldn't betray them. It was then that he decided to make an unexpected visit to the building where they lived. But this time, he wanted to speak directly to Raquel, without beating around the bush, without fear. He knew that the mother's rejection was the main obstacle, but he also understood that if he wanted to change their lives, he had to break through that barrier. That afternoon, when Raquel was in the small room where they took refuge, Ricardo appeared once again. The woman looked at him with distrust, but for some reason, she didn't throw him out. This time, it wasn't just a job offer. It was something deeper. "Raquel," Ricardo began, his voice firm but kind. "I know what happened to you, what he did to you. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. And what I want more than anything is for you and your daughter to have a chance to live again, to recover what belongs to you. You don't have to do it alone. I offer my help, without any conditions." Raquel looked at him, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Something inside her seemed to be struggling, as if the desire to believe in someone was about to awaken. Raquel's gaze was still distrustful, but there was also a spark of something else in her eyes, a faint hope. Ricardo could perceive it, like a small crack in the wall of distrust she had built over the years. He didn't dare take another step forward, aware that he couldn't force her. But he also didn't want to leave without showing her that his offer was sincere. "I can offer you a place to live, Raquel. Maria has a lot of talent, and I'm willing to give her a chance. But most importantly, I want to help heal what was done to you," Ricardo insisted, maintaining his calm tone, almost as if speaking to someone who needed to listen, not just be convinced. Raquel remained silent for a long time, looking at her daughter, who, although not understanding the conversation, could feel the tension in the air. Maria walked over to her mother, taking her hand. That simple yet full of love gesture revealed the depth of their bond. Raquel and Maria only had each other. "And why would you help us? What are you looking for in return?" asked Raquel, her voice firm but with a hint of curiosity, as if she were evaluating something beyond Ricardo's words. Ricardo took a deep breath. He knew that his answer could be crucial. "I'm not looking for anything in return, Raquel. I just believe that Maria has a bright future ahead, and you deserve more than this life of shadows. No one should live with the fear you carry. I'm not asking you to trust me immediately, but I just want to show you that there is something beyond this place." Raquel, despite her cautious nature, felt something she couldn't explain. It was as if Ricardo's words not only reached her ears, but also touched her heart, awakening memories of a life she had lost long ago. She remembered her business, her success, her freedom. That woman who once thought she had everything, now struggling to keep her daughter safe, to give her what she never had. Finally, Raquel nodded, though her face was still marked by indecision. "Give me time to think about it," she said softly. "What you're asking is not easy, but I promise I'll think about it." Ricardo nodded, knowing that he had taken the first step. He couldn't expect everything to change immediately, but at least he had planted the seed of possibility. He stood up, determined to give them the space they needed. But before he left, he paused and looked at Maria, who was watching him from the threshold of the door. "Maria," he said gently, "I want you to know that if you decide to accept the offer, you will be the one to make the decision. I don't want anyone to force you into anything, but I want you to know that there's a place for you if one day you want to leave this fear behind." Maria looked at him intently. She didn't respond right away, but something in her gaze softened. There was something in his words that gave her the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was an opportunity to change. That night, Ricardo couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Raquel and Maria were at a crossroads. He knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The distrust that Raquel carried inside was deep, but something had changed. Something inside her had begun to move. The next day, Raquel called him. "Ricardo, I want to talk to you." she said firmly. "I'm going to accept your offer, but with one condition." Ricardo felt a stab of nervousness. What condition could Raquel have after everything she had said? "My daughter and I don't need charity," Raquel continued. "If we accept your help, it will be on our own terms. Maria will have to work and learn, but I don't want you to think it will be a favor. The opportunity you give her will be for her future, not your charity." Ricardo smiled. That was the answer he had hoped for. Raquel, though full of pain and distrust, still held on to her pride and determination. Maria would have a place in the world, but she would have to earn it. "Understood," Ricardo replied, "and I promise that everything will be done according to your terms." The beginning of a new chapter for Maria and her mother was about to start. Although there were still many unanswered questions, Ricardo felt he was taking an important step, but he also knew that his true challenge was still ahead. Meanwhile, the shadows of Raquel's past continued to haunt her, and Ricardo couldn't help but wonder how much of what had happened before would influence the decisions they made in the future. The answer was still unclear, but there was one thing he knew for sure. The decisions they made in that moment would change all of their destinies forever. Despite the decision made, Raquel didn't feel at peace. Accepting Ricardo's offer had been a huge step for her, but she still found it hard to believe in anyone's good intentions. After everything she had lived through, it was almost impossible to trust without reservation, even when someone seemed genuinely interested in helping. In the days that followed, Raquel and Maria began organizing their things. Although the building they lived in was abandoned, it had a roof that protected them from the weather, and for Raquel, that was more than enough. They had made that place their home, a fortress against the world that had betrayed them. But now, that refuge was no longer enough. Something had to change. Ricardo, for his part, had started to make a plan. He had contacted his lawyer and a contractor to help Raquel and her daughter move to a more suitable place. It was a first step, but he felt that this act of support was not only necessary, but vital to breaking the invisible chains that kept Raquel tied to her painful past. The day they arrived at the new house, Raquel stood in silence, looking at the entrance. It was a small but cozy house, much more than the old building they had been living in. The red brick facade, the well-maintained garden, and the clean windows gave it an air of dignity that Raquel hadn't seen in a long time. However, the feeling of discomfort grew in her chest. "It's yours, Raquel," Ricardo said, watching her expression. "This is the first step. You and your daughter don't have to live in the shadows. Now you can start anew." Raquel didn't know how to respond. There was something in Ricardo's generosity that bewildered her. She wasn't used to receiving help without having to give something in return. In her former world, people didn't do things without a hidden motive, without wanting to get something out of it, and that distrust still pulsed within her, blocking any genuine sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Ricardo," she finally said, although the words didn't sound as sincere as he had hoped. "But I don't want you to think this changes everything. My daughter and I still have a lot to overcome." Ricardo nodded, acknowledging her pain. "I don't expect everything to change immediately, but now you have a future, and you won't lose it." As Raquel entered her new home, Maria ran into the living room, admiring the new walls and the space where she could move freely. Although her face still showed a hint of distrust, curiosity began to fill her eyes. This new house was different, much brighter and warmer than the abandoned building. However, Maria also knew that the changes weren't just about the walls around them, but about the decisions they would make from that moment on. That evening, while Raquel was preparing dinner, a phone call interrupted her thoughts. It was from her lawyer, who had important updates about the case with her ex-husband Daniel. Even though his name still made her stomach tighten, she knew this was the moment when things had to be resolved. "Raquel, We have an opportunity. They've found evidence of fraud that could be used against Daniel. It seems he was involved in illegal activities with some of his partners, the lawyer said on the phone. Raquel dropped the spoon she was holding. Her ex-husband, the man who had stolen her life, would finally face consequences. But the news didn't fill her with relief. It filled her with uncertainty. Was this the opportunity to recover what she had lost, or would she be dragged back into a cycle of pain? Meanwhile, Maria approached her mother, who seemed lost in her thoughts. "Mom, what's wrong?" the little girl asked, noticing the change in her mother's expression. Raquel smiled faintly and patted her daughter's head. "Nothing, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about everything that's happened to us. Sometimes things seem unsolvable, but this is our moment to change." The next morning, Ricardo visited them again. He wasn't just bringing words this time. He had papers, plans, and a proposal for Maria. Although Raquel remained cautious, something inside her told her that this man was willing to help them in a way she hadn't expected. "Maria, I want to offer you a real opportunity for your future. I know you're very talented, and I want you to work with me. This is just the beginning, but what you choose to do with your life depends only on you." Maria looked at him in silence, evaluating his words. She didn't have many opportunities in life, and this seemed to be the only open door. But there was also something inside her that told her not to trust easily. Yet, something had changed in her. The fear that had accompanied her for so long was beginning to fade. But before she could respond, a strange noise interrupted the moment. A man had arrived at the door, and upon seeing his face, Raquel paled. It was Daniel, her ex-husband. "Raquel, I'm sorry," he said with a voice full of false sincerity. "I know I've hurt you, but now I want to make up for my mistakes. I'm willing to help you. What do you say we talk about all of this?" Raquel looked at him in disbelief. The man who had destroyed her life was now asking for a second chance. But Raquel knew one thing. Things weren't the same as before, and she wasn't going to let her life be manipulated again. Daniel's presence at the door disturbed the air. Raquel felt a knot in her stomach, a mixture of anger and fear. The man who had torn away her peace, who had stripped her of everything she once built, was now standing there, in front of her, with an appearance of regret. But Raquel knew she couldn't trust him. "Raquel, please," Daniel insisted, trying to step forward. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make them right. You and Maria deserve better. Let me help you." Raquel, her eyes narrowed, could no longer stand his lies. "Help me! After everything you did to me, you have no right to show up here, Daniel," she replied, her voice harsh, almost like an order. Ricardo, who had been watching in silence, saw the danger of the situation. He couldn't let Raquel fall into the trap of empty promises from such a calculating man. He stepped in between them, protecting Raquel and Maria with a firmness that even surprised Raquel. "Daniel, if you've come here to try to manipulate them again, I warn you, I won't allow it," Ricardo said, his voice filled with authority. "If you truly care about what you've done, the only way you can prove it is by facing the consequences of your actions." Daniel looked at him with disdain, clearly annoyed by the intervention. "And who are you to tell me what I should do? This is a matter between my wife and me. Stay out of it." But Ricardo didn't move. "I'm someone who cares about them, and I won't let you keep destroying them." Raquel, feeling the weight of the memories, looked at her ex-husband one last time. Her gaze, as cold as ice, pierced through him. "You know what, Daniel? I stopped expecting anything good from you a long time ago. There's nothing you can do to change what you did to me. I suggest you leave now, or I'll call the police." Daniel, realizing that Raquel was no longer the same vulnerable woman he had once manipulated, gritted his teeth. But he knew the game was over. With one last furious glance, he turned and left, disappearing from her life for the second time. The silence that remained in the room was thick, but there was also a sense of liberation. Raquel knew that the battle with her ex-husband was not over, but at least today she had regained a piece of her power. Maria, who had remained silent throughout the encounter, cautiously approached her mother. "Mom, do you think everything will change now? Do you think we've really left it all behind?" Raquel hugged her daughter, gently stroking her hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know if we'll ever fully leave it all behind. But what I do know is that we're not going to keep living in fear. What he did, that's in the past now. Our life starts over today." Ricardo, seeing the tension dissipate, nodded. "Raquel, what you're doing is stronger than you think. You're not alone in this. You have your daughter, you have a future, and you have the chance to make your story end a different way." Raquel looked at him, feeling for the first time a true sense of gratitude toward him. Although she still had reservations, something inside her began to change. She wasn't alone in her fight anymore. She no longer had to carry the weight of the world alone. That night, after Daniel left, Raquel sat with Maria and Ricardo. They shared a simple meal, but the feeling of unity and hope filled the air. There was something different in their hearts, something that told them this wasn't just an opportunity to start over, but also a chance to heal. However, that calm didn't last long. The next day, Raquel received an unexpected call. It was her lawyer, and what he told her left her in shock. "Raquel, I've spoken to the authorities. Daniel's case has become more complicated. Not only is there evidence of fraud, but they've also found records of illegal activities involving some very powerful people. The matter has taken a dangerous turn." Raquel felt a chill run through her. Her lawyer's words echoed in her head. What had Daniel done that was now putting everyone in danger? "Raquel, you need to prepare yourself. This case could go beyond what we thought. The people behind Daniel are not easy to face." Raquel's future with her daughter was becoming increasingly uncertain. If there was one thing she had learned over all those years of suffering, it was that she couldn't trust anyone. But now, the danger came from a much darker, much bigger place than she had ever imagined. Meanwhile, Ricardo, who was already aware of the severity of the situation, knew that this would be a decisive moment. He not only had to protect Raquel and Maria, but also ensure that Raquel's past wouldn't continue to haunt them. But the shadows of what Daniel had done were closer than any of them had imagined. Raquel couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with her lawyer. The future seemed to crumble before her, as if the weight of everything she had lived through was dragging her back into an abyss she couldn't escape. Her lawyer's words rang in her mind. The people behind Daniel are not easy to face. Who were these people? How far would Daniel go to destroy them? That night, as Maria slept, Raquel sat by the window, watching the distant city lights. There was something in the air that unsettled her, something she couldn't explain. Every creak of the old building, every shadow on the street, seemed to be silently lurking, like an invisible threat. Ricardo had been clear. They weren't alone, and their past was still knocking at the door. But Raquel couldn't fully trust him, even though she felt his help was genuine. However, the danger didn't only come from Daniel. Something else was moving in the shadows, something much larger than she or Ricardo could comprehend. The next day, while she was out buying supplies, Raquel noticed something strange. A black car was parked in front of their new house. It wasn't an ordinary car. Its dark windows didn't reveal who was inside, but something deep inside told her it wasn't a coincidence. Raquel approached slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't want Maria to notice anything, so she tried to stay calm. She looked around, but there was no one else on the street. The car remained there still, like a silent observer. What do I do now? Raquel thought, unsure whether to approach or just ignore it, but the feeling of being watched kept her on edge. That afternoon, Ricardo arrived at her house with a grave expression. "Raquel, we need to talk. I just received news. Daniel's case has escalated more than we thought. The people behind him are very powerful, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Raquel frowned, looking at Ricardo with distrust. "What do they want from me? What more can they do to me?" Ricardo sighed and sat down in front of her. "I don't know, but what I do know is that they will do whatever it takes to intimidate you. They've started investigating your past, looking for any weakness they can exploit." Raquel shuddered. The feeling of being chased by a ghost from her past was overwhelming. Why couldn't they leave her in peace? How far would they go? Suddenly the doorbell rang. Maria, who had been playing in the yard, ran to open it. Upon seeing him, Raquel tensed. Standing at the door was a tall man, dressed in a dark suit with a cold, calculating look. Without saying a word, the man walked past Maria and entered the house. Raquel, stunned, stared at him in disbelief. Who was this man? What did he want? "I'm Julio from Ricardo's security office," the man said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "I'm here to install some additional security measures to protect your family." Raquel stared at him, confused. "Security measures? What are you talking about?" Ricardo stood up and approached Raquel. "Raquel, I know this is a lot to process, but things are taking a dangerous turn. Julio is a security expert. He's worked with many people in situations like yours." Raquel nodded slowly, but something inside her told her not to trust this offer completely. The arrival of this man only raised more questions in her mind. Why now? Why so suddenly? Julio began installing security cameras around the house and reinforcing the doors and windows. Raquel watched in silence, unable to shake the feeling of being trapped in an invisible net that was tightening around her. While Julio worked, Raquel retreated to her bedroom. She needed to think, to organize her thoughts. What were they really protecting her from? Was it possible that someone had been watching them closely? She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, and that black car kept circling her mind. At that moment, something gave her an idea. "The car," she thought. "If these people know so much about my life, maybe they've been following us all along." Paranoia began to take control of her thoughts, but she also felt she was close to discovering something crucial. At the same time, outside the house, the black car stopped at a distant corner. A man with a serious face and penetrating eyes watched Raquel's house from inside the car. The same man who had been parked outside her house hours earlier. At that moment, Raquel, peering out the window, saw him. Their eyes met briefly, but the man didn't move a muscle. It was as if he had been waiting for her. A chill ran down Raquel's spine. Now, it was no longer just about her ex-husband. Someone else was involved, someone more dangerous, and the worst part was that Raquel had no idea who or what was behind all of this. Julio finished installing the cameras, but the insecurity persisted. Raquel knew that protection was only part of the plan. What she really needed was to understand who was pulling the strings behind this entire threat, and who better than her ex-husband to answer that question. But as Raquel prepared to confront her fate, she didn't know that the game she was about to play with the shadows of her past would have much larger consequences than she had ever imagined. The next morning was gray. The clouds darkened the sky as if the city itself shared Raquel's anxiety. Every step she took, every breath she took, reminded her of how far she was from peace. She knew the shadows of her past wouldn't let her go so easily. What scared her most was that she didn't even know who she was dealing with. Daniel, her ex-husband, had only been the beginning of a much more dangerous story. After a restless night, with the security cameras monitoring every corner of the house, Raquel couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious black car. Every time she looked out the window, Fear swept over her, as if something was lying in wait. The man in the car had watched her slowly, emotionless, as if he already knew everything about her. What do they want? Raquel thought, clenching her fists. She felt like they were pushing her into a corner with no way out. Ricardo, who had arrived early to check on the camera installation, saw Raquel's tense face. "Is everything okay?" he asked, noticing her unease. "No, Ricardo, it's not. I saw the car again last night. I'm sure they're watching us," Raquel replied, trying to stay calm. Ricardo frowned. "We need to be prepared. Something big is about to happen, and we need to stay one step ahead." Throughout the day, Raquel tried to focus on what she had to do. Maria was at school, which gave her some relief, but her mind couldn't stop thinking about the imminent danger. Every strange sound, every glance from strangers on the street made her feel vulnerable. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, things would only get worse. That afternoon, when Ricardo called to talk, Raquel felt that something was brewing, something that would bring her closer to the end of this nightmare. "Raquel, we need to talk about the next step. We can't keep living like this. We need you to trust us completely," Ricardo said, his tone serious. Raquel sat at the small table in her kitchen, watching Ricardo with a mix of fear and hope. "The thing is, I don't know who to trust anymore. Things are getting really complicated. I'm not sure if we should go on with this." Ricardo looked at her intently, as if he had been expecting that response. "Raquel, I understand your fears, but I promise you, you're not alone. I'm here, and if we stick together, we'll get you what you deserve." Raquel, clenching her fists, nodded. "All right, but I want to know more about what's going on. I need to know what they're planning." Suddenly, a metallic noise interrupted the conversation. A distant but clear sound, as if someone had tried to open the back door. Raquel immediately stood up. "Ricardo," she said in a low but firm voice. Ricardo stood up, his expression hardening. "Be careful," he ordered, pointing at the security cameras. "I'll check. Stay here, Raquel." Raquel had no strength to argue. She stayed there, heart racing, as Ricardo quickly went to the backyard. But what Raquel didn't know was that the trap had already been set, and Ricardo was about to walk right into it. Outside, Ricardo approached the back gate cautiously. Everything was silent, too quiet. The wind moved some fallen leaves, but there were no signs of intruders. However, something didn't feel right. Something was off. Turning to the corner of the house, Ricardo saw a figure hidden in the shadows, a man standing still, watching in his direction. Before he could react, the man quickly moved toward him. "Ricardo, get back!" Raquel screamed from the window, but it was too late. The man, dressed in dark clothing, shoved him hard, knocking him to the ground. "Don't move," he ordered, pointing a gun at Ricardo, who quickly got up but without making any sudden movements. Raquel couldn't think about anything but her daughter's safety. She ran to the front door and hurried outside, trying to find a way to help Ricardo. But as she stepped out, she saw a second figure, this time closer, emerging from a black vehicle parked in front of the house. It was the same man who had watched her on the street the night before. "Who are you?" Raquel shouted, her voice growing more frantic. The man from the black car slowly approached, with an unsettling calmness. "This is nothing personal, Raquel. We're just making sure you don't make any wrong decisions. It would be best if you gave us what we want, and all of this would end." Raquel felt her legs tremble. She had no idea what they were talking about. "What are you talking about? What do you want from me? What Daniel did doesn't just affect you. There's a lot of money at stake, and what he did to you isn't just a mistake. It's bad business for everyone involved," the man explained, his face impassive. "Now do the right thing." Raquel stood there, speechless, as anguish overwhelmed her. What was really happening? The threat was closer than she had imagined. The trap was already set, and now only one option remained: play their game or face the consequences. But Raquel wasn't going to let her life or her daughter's be manipulated this way. "Ricardo," she whispered, her voice trembling, "help me. I don't know what to do." The game was about to change radically. And the worst part was that Raquel at last realized that nothing she had done up until now had prepared her for what was to come. The day of the trial arrived like an unexpected storm, full of tension and fear. Raquel woke up early, as if the weight of the preceding hours were crushing her. From the window of her room, she could see the city slowly waking up, as though nothing in the world were about to change. But for her, the world was about to take a definitive turn. Maria was nervous, as if she could feel her mother's anxiety. Raquel hugged her tightly, trying to calm her, but her own hands were shaking. She knew that this day would decide her future, her daughter's, and perhaps even that of her entire family. The time had come to face the man who had ruined their lives, and Raquel couldn't back down. The courtroom was full of people. The room buzzed with whispers, the chairs creaking under the weight of the tension. On the stand, Raquel saw her ex-husband, Daniel, with an expression of superiority, as if everything were under his control. But what Raquel didn't know was that behind that facade, something far more sinister lurked. Today, the truth will be revealed, Raquel thought, looking at the faces of all those present. The atmosphere was heavy, and though she couldn't see all the faces, she could feel the eyes of every person on her. Daniel's lawyer was a tall man with a cold smile designed to instill fear. He had done everything he could to discredit Raquel, portraying her as an incapable mother and a woman who couldn't care for her daughter. But Raquel was not willing to give in. She knew that the truth, though painful, had to come to light. "Your Honor," began Daniel's lawyer, "this woman has been playing with everyone's emotions, manipulating the situation to her advantage. She has, on several occasions, tried to manipulate her daughter for gain and protection." Raquel felt the weight of each word like a blow, but she stood firm. She knew this wasn't the end. Justice was not on Daniel's side, and she had enough evidence to prove it. Ricardo was present in the room, beside her. His gaze was fixed on Raquel, a mix of support and concern. He had been her ally throughout this process, and even though the situation was grave, he still believed that what was at stake was far greater than their fear. Daniel's defense was fierce, but Raquel had something he hadn't anticipated, her own story. The story of her escape, her struggle, how she had survived betrayal and pain. When it was her turn to speak, Raquel stood up with determination, though her voice trembled slightly. "Your Honor," she began, looking at the judge firmly, "what my ex-husband did was more than a simple mistake. He ruined my life, he stole everything I had, and more than that, he stole my trust in people. But I never gave up. I fought to move forward, and now I'm here, ready to face everything they've put me through." Raquel's words resonated through the room, and for a moment, everything fell silent. The trial had taken a turn. She wasn't just fighting for her daughter, but for her own dignity. Every word was like a dagger in Daniel's heart, and he couldn't help but show his discomfort. It was then that an unexpected twist happened. The man from the black car, who had been watching from the shadows, entered the room with an arrogant attitude. Raquel recognized him instantly, but what she didn't know was that his presence in court meant something far more serious. "What is he doing here?" asked Daniel's lawyer, looking at the man with a mixture of surprise and distrust. "I am the key witness," said the man, his voice low but firm, "and I have information that will change the course of this trial." Raquel felt her heart stop. What kind of information could this man have? Was this another game of Daniel's? The man walked up to the stand, and before Raquel could ask a question, he began to speak. "Raquel doesn't know, but Daniel is not alone in this matter. Her ex-husband has been receiving support from some very powerful people who have a lot of money and power. And worst of all, these people are willing to do anything to make sure this trial ends in their favor." The room filled with murmurs. Raquel felt as though the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. The man's words confirmed something she had feared. The game wasn't just against Daniel, it was against a much bigger network. "If you don't act fast," the man continued, "Daniel and his allies are going to destroy everything Raquel has built. Her life and her daughter's life are in danger." Raquel looked at Ricardo, who also seemed stunned but somehow confident. He knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that, though terrifying, he wouldn't let destroy her life again. The judge called for a recess as the room continued to buzz with whispers. Raquel retreated to a corner, trying to process what had just happened, but something inside her told her that this trial wouldn't end today. This was only the first step in a battle that would last much longer. And when the court doors closed at the end of the day, Raquel's future, Maria's, and everyone involved hung in the balance, dependent on a decision that would forever change their lives. But the question still hung in the air. Who was really behind all of this? How far would they go to destroy her? And so we reach the end of another chapter full of unexpected twists. Raquel now finds herself in the middle of a much larger battle than she ever thought, and the future of her daughter, and even Ricardo is at stake. But who are Daniel's real allies, and what will they be willing to do to win this trial? Only time will tell. If you're as intrigued as I am about what's coming in the next chapter, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any details of this story. Your support motivates us to keep bringing you more incredible content. Now I want to know your opinion. What do you think Raquel should do now? Keep trusting Ricardo or take control of things herself? Let me know your response in the comments, and let's talk about what might happen in the next episode. Maybe your theory will change the course of the story. See you in the next video, and stay tuned.